Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Living Room Sessions. Today, I'm really excited to welcome you into my virtual couch in a slightly different location. Stephanie isn't joining me today, but I have asked a friend to join me for a really important conversation in this cultural moment. As you well know, our church has been engaged in having an ongoing conversation around race, culture, and the church in light of what's happening in our world, but not just with the heart of kind of reactively responding to what's happening, but actually wanting, like so many other voices out there, to be a voice of transformative change, to lead in this moment. And I'm so blessed to have a friend who is one of the indigenous peoples of Canada. He's part of the First Nation up in Westbank, BC. His name is Aaron Derickson, and I met him probably many decades ago when he was in youth ministry and I was in youth ministry. I won't say how long because we look much younger than the years would suggest. But I'm going to welcome him to the call now. Hey, Aaron, good afternoon. How you doing?
Hey, Todd, I'm doing well, guy. How are you doing?
I'm so good, and I'm so thankful we can have this conversation today. Maybe tell us a little bit about kind of who you are, and I think by extension, with humility, why I think you would have some authority to speak into the Indigenous perspective on race, culture, and the church in this moment that we're living in today. Tell us a bit about you.
My name is Aaron Derickson. I'm a member of Westbank First Nation, as Todd said, of the First Nation here in the interior. That makes up 7 communities make up our nation. One of them is Westbank First Nation here in Westbank. We're known for our governance. I'm a PhD candidate at UBC Okanagan. I study leadership and governance from a Syilx perspective based on our Cheptiks, or our oral tradition. So I look at leadership from a Syilx perspective from our Cheptiks, and then I look at the mainstream and academic literature and see where they intersect, intertwine, and where they disagree, which is important too. So that's really awesome. That's a lot of fun. I have 2 boys. I'm married, and we live here in Westbank. I own a consulting business named Syilx Strong Consulting, where I help organizations and people in their leadership training and also in governance training. So I'm set to do my case study for my PhD quite quickly here, which will be a lot of fun, and then hopefully defend in the next year or so.
Amazing. Congratulations, man. I mean, it's funny, when we met, this wasn't even on the radar for you. I don't know if it was even a dream in your heart at the time. You were like a teenager, young adult, kind of in that season. And it's just amazing to see how God continues to lead and direct people to places of discovery, of academia, of influence in different spheres. And I'm so proud of you and what you've accomplished in your life. It's amazing. I had no idea you and I would be friends, and that 20 years after I was talking to this very learned.
You just dropped the year. You were supposed to drop the year. You dropped the year 20 years later.
Shoot. I mostly did it because I wanted everyone to think, man, those guys knew each other when they were young adults at 20. They are so useful and spry. Yes, you said it right, if that's what you were thinking. Aaron, maybe on a little bit more serious note, pivoting into this moment, and you and I have had a number of conversations around my desire really to listen and to learn, and hopefully express the biblical ethic of love in this moment and learn how to better do that. Can you just speak a little bit to start today about just your experience in these last weeks as we've walked through this catalyst with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and all that's happened globally since then? Can you give me a little bit of a snapshot of what's been going on in you?
Yeah, thanks for that, Todd. Well, first of all, I want to say that my voice is from an Indigenous perspective, from a Syilx perspective. So I really don't represent all of the Indigenous people of Canada. I'm sure the nation would be, giving me the thumbs up and encouraging me to do all this good stuff. I really don't speak, for the Black community in Canada or the United States. I want to make that clear. I'm glad to be part of this conversation. I think it's high time that it happened. But I want to extend my love and my support, raise my hands to my Black brothers and sisters who are going through this season and the challenges that it faces personally during this time. I'm sure as people are seeing on the news, you have Apple News or you go on CBC.ca or you got it on your phone, you got the app. you've seen the news stories that have been coming out about violence against people of color, specifically Black people, and also in Canada, Indigenous people. In New Brunswick, 2 Indigenous people have been killed in the past month. Seeing these things and reading these stories is traumatizing and re-triggers trauma in my own life. To be very plain and simple, when violence, emotional violence, and physical violence was rendered against me as an Indigenous man. It's hard because it's almost like if you relive it and you can feel those emotions of being devalued and those emotions of being put to the side and forgotten about. If you ever experienced a sense of powerlessness, and where you're at the bottom, you can't do anything else. When you're powerless, you don't have power, period. It doesn't matter what tools or faculties you have. And those feelings are evoked. And I'm sure other people can resonate that with this experience, and you're not seen or heard. And then you try to communicate that experience to others. Say, look, this is what happened. This is what this person did. And for that to be dismissed is traumatizing as a human being. And so to see these now, there's this mixed bag of feeling these emotions, and at the same time feeling a sense of relief that it's hitting the media and people are waking up and people are listening and people are saying, how, like this conversation, how can we better incorporate people of color? How can we into Indigenous people? How can we use?
Man, I just am sitting in the weight of your words here for a moment and really trying to resonate on a heart level that it's hard for me as a white Canadian to fully put myself in that place. I can imagine, I can have a measure of empathy and compassion, and I certainly do. But it's hard to understand what it is to live that way. This morning, you and I were talking just to coordinate times where we could do this. And you said something so weighty to me that really kind of helped me understand. And you talked about how it's almost like a rash that you live with, that you learn to live with. Can you talk a little bit about that? I do kind of put the pieces of what's going on right now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can certainly speak authoritatively to that because I've had hives twice in my life. Where it was like this unbelievable rash just came all over my body, and it was just like, I don't know what happened. I went to go get all the tests done or whatever. Anyways, long story short is that it happened, and it took about 7 days to clear up. But it's like what I said, what Todd, you and I talking about that, experiencing this racism. It's like one person said to me, the line, why don't you just get over it? The residential schools, the forced assimilation, the violence against your ancestors, against forced relocation, one place to another. Like, why don't you just get over that? All the laws, discriminatory stuff that went against you, like that stuff's in the past. And I said, yeah, that's a great point. And to be honest, I have gotten over that. But you know what I haven't gotten over is the stuff that happened last week and yesterday and the week before. I'm still processing that stuff. And that's what it's like. It's like you have this constant rash on your arm. That's like, you're aware of it. You can't necessarily, you don't have a lot of control over it. It's painful, but you got to go about life. You got to go to work. You got to be a parent. You got to, to quote SNL, you got to put your pants on one leg at a time. You got to get that cowbell out. You got to do life, and people don't understand that you're constantly processing what's happening. This that you're experiencing, and when you're a person of color, like the more visible you are, not just physically the color of my skin, but the more visible you are in terms of how you speak and your mind and how you use it. That the more you're in the spotlight, and the more that's there to be discriminated against because of who you are. So if I walk in and I start speaking about Indigenous rights in Canada, about Sikh values and responsibilities to the land and to family and to our own communities, that turns some people off because I'm exposed. I am visible as an Indigenous person, and now there's a greater potential for that irritation to come about. And I mean, the worst. I don't know if that's the worst part of one of the worst parts about racism is when you experience it afresh, where it's like, okay, you just processed or you just went through, just kind of, were able to think about emotionally, pray about what just happened. And then someone comes around and scratches that rash and you're like, oh, And you're like, okay, I got to go through this again, and that's a constant battle. I think that's something people need to understand, is that it doesn't go. I would love for it to go away, but like this is why these kind of conversations are so important in the wake of what has happened in the United States.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Obviously, you know this. I'm a pastor. A certain community, probably a lot of the people watching this are connected in some way, directly or indirectly, to that, and have some sort of faith conviction around Christ and who Jesus is. Regardless, they're welcome. But I want to talk a little bit more about the church in this conversation about race and culture, because I know for you, you've had different seasons and times where you have felt in some ways othered, if I can use the term, in the church, like it hasn't been a safe place for you. Not in an effort to expose or degrade anybody, and let's not use names. I don't think we would do that. But can you help us understand what was difficult for you as an Indigenous man growing up, so that we can learn how to create a space in our community that is already, I think, beautifully diverse and expresses that diversity in what I hope is a really authentic and genuine. I do better. I want to be not just average at this. I want to be a catalyst for really great conversations and a really great picture of, I think, what Jesus imagined to look like. Lots of races, tribes, colors, tongues, expressions, food that comes along with it. All of these different spaces and places coming together in their differences to celebrate. So maybe speak to that a little bit, and maybe to that, talk a little bit about how does the church move forward, kind of from your own experience and also your education, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it earlier on in this conversation, Todd. You said, I don't know if I'll ever fully understand. I'm a white male, middle class, living in suburbia, and Vancouver. Well, you didn't say the last part about that, but it's.
I used the to first live in thing suburbia. I'm in urbia now, baby.
You are suburbia in your heart forever. You are.
The Lord rebuke that, baby. I'm all things Vancouver, right here.
I am Vancouver. When I was going to church, really, really dysfunctional place. And the amazing thing is that when Jesus is God, so if you have Jesus, he's able to work in and through that. Doesn't mean he authors that stuff by any means. But that's just where I was in the beginning of my faith. And one of the worst things happened, and I say one of the worst. You'd hear these pastors from the pulpit, these white males, or sometimes white females, use anecdotal evidence or bullet point illustration of their sermon that speaks to Native people. It's like I was up north for a while, and I had my best friend was Henry, and he was Native, right? And they kind of go off about that, or they have an anecdote of, I heard about this piece in history, and they did this stuff over there to these Native people, and that's tragic. And it's to a degree, it comes from a good place to be able to recognize Indigenous people, but it's like speaking to stuff that they don't have the authority to speak with, and nor should they be. I mean, look, I don't go into the science faculty building and walk up to everybody who's having a meeting about like chromosomes and plants and just put my hands on my hips and be like, so guys, let's get this conversation started. They'd be like, okay, but the church needs to understand that Indigenous people, I'll speak to that because I am Indigenous during this conversation, is that we have our own culture. We have our own social culture. We have our own culture that was attempted to be very literally and by the government, by the church. And so the church needs to understand that in order to help the dialogue move forward, they have to let Indigenous people speak, to be seen, to be heard. I think about the other day I was reading in John, I think it's chapter 2, where Jesus comes and he says to Nathaniel, and he says, "Oh, Nathaniel," he starts saying all this stuff towards him. And how do you know me? You know me? And for me, that was such a powerful moment. I'm reading this, and I'm like, wow, Jesus sees me. I am by God. God knows. He doesn't just know me oh yeah, I know that guy over there. I've heard. God knows me, and he wants to know me. And the amazing thing about God is that he reveals himself to man. I think about the disciples, Peter, John, post-resurrection, or Peter, James, and John, and they're like, guys, let's go fishing. They're out on the boat, and Jesus is on the shore, and he's like calling to them. He's like, hey, guys, hey, like put the net on the other side of the boat. And do that. And there's this moment where John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, turns to Peter and James and says, it's him. And they realize, because Jesus did that when the beginning of his ministry. And in the beginning of their ministry, a little bit of a side note is that their boat could not contain it, and the nets broke. When you read that in Luke, and you go to John at the end of this Jesus' time on earth, and then his ministry, and John makes sure to put in there, by the way, the boat was full and the nets didn't break and the boat didn't sink. And so there's this idea that, like, when we allow Jesus to reveal himself to us, and he's looking for a relationship, that we're able to carry what he wants us to carry. I think about Chief Cadinus, who's the chief of the Penticton Indian Band, and he's telling me about what his dad said. He's like, part of being a man in the context of a Seal male, he's like, when you want something to be a part of your life, you pick it up and you carry it. And you carry it until it becomes a part of you. And then you can put it down. And so the church needs to pick up this love that Jesus had for these, for people, and needs to carry that and to understand the best possible, to the most that they possibly can, what it is to love people of color, what it is to love indigenous people, love our culture and our ways of being and our ways of knowing. And until the church can have part of the fabric of their nature to understand that Jesus sees them as he saw Nathaniel, at that point, then they'll be able to say, okay, this season or this part of this is done. We talked about the conversation, but I want to add one more thing quickly, is that, I hope I'm not jumping ahead. I think about Jesus going to the well and seeing the Samaritan woman in the middle of the day, and how Samaritans racism, and that the fact that the Samaritans were pushed to the side because of who they were. They weren't considered fully Jews. And of course, the Samaritan woman was at the well when there was nobody else at the well. People gathered their water in the morning. And of course, Jesus knew and was sitting there, and he tells her, again, he sees who she is. And, like in my younger years, I read that passage, like, oh man, he just he told her all about her sin. Well, if all he did, if that was the Jesus, which is not the Jesus I know, but if that was what Jesus did and just told her about all her sin, why would she be so excited to go back in to tell all the people this guy, you have no idea, this guy talked to me. And all these people were like, the message of Jesus and of love and of acceptance and the good news that you can be reconnected to God, and you can spend the turn with them. You know what I mean? So the idea that in my mind, it's like she was like, I was seen, I was heard. And so this is the chief that I know, is that the Great Commission is not just for middle class people. The Great Commission is just as much for Indigenous people as it's for anyone else.
Got preachy tingles over here. I mean, I feel like you got your preach on a little bit there. I don't know if you had notes or whatever, but I'm ready. I'm ready to respond. Oh, thank you for that. Honestly, it's profound, and it's important for us to see within our sacred text as followers of Christ these principles of truth that really reinforce that. Because another thing that I've heard that has grieved my heart, I know this is a complete picture, and I love to just sort of end our conversation today by you maybe speak to this. I've heard a lot of typically white Christian pastors say, well, all lives matter in this moment. They're pivoting away from that kind of minority recognition. Can you talk to me and maybe help those who are maybe listening who have fallen into that mindset? Which, of course, there is a small measure. There's a measure of truth, I believe, in that principle, but it's incomplete in this moment, and it's not reflecting what God, I think, really wants to do in and through the church and in culture in this moment. I think it's stripping it of its power. Can you speak to why that's an incomplete thought in this moment, and why it's so important we recognize the Black Lives Matter movement, or bring the Indigenous voice and perspective into this conversation on race and culture in this moment?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Todd. Thanks for bringing that up. All life will not matter until Black lives matter, until Indigenous lives matter. The church needs to understand that it needs to own the racism that's been a part of the fabric of the church for a long, long time. Jesus talked about coming back from a pure and spotless bride. Well, I'm saying that this is a blemish, and it's a blemish that God is seeking to purify in his church and to work through his grace and his love. The Bible says that it's the goodness of God that brings a person to repentance. So God is being good in this moment and giving us this opportunity to respond. And I would just say that if all lives really mattered, as they say, in the context of what they're saying, then we wouldn't have to be talking that, speaking and saying Black lives. If there was no problem and there was no problem with equality, then we don't have to be saying that. One of the things I experience as an Indigenous person is that when I bring a truth forward about my lived experience, about racism, if it doesn't want to listen to it, and unfortunately, it's usually a white person. Unfortunately, and I'm not saying those are the only racist people out there in terms of racism having to do with power structures, by the way, but in my case, that's been the case. When I present this forward, often dismissed with an impartial truth. That sounds good at first. That kind of resonates, and people are like, "Oh yeah, I guess so." But it dismisses the conversation, at least in their mind, into those who are around them. So if you're on Twitter, they present the partial truth, and all their followers like it and retweet it and all this stuff. And if you're on stage, or if you're with everyone in the crowd shouts, "Amen, yeah, that's right." And in this case, the impartial truth is that all lives matter. Of course they do. Of course, all lives matter. But people got to understand that if this were the human race, were an actual race, that a lot of people are starting at the starting line. And Indigenous people and I'll say people of color, Black people, Black Lives Matter, we are 100 yards from the. We're not even at the starting line. We're not even there. We don't have the determinants of that successful person in terms of family and coming from socioeconomic status to allow you to pivot you to go forward. Yeah, maybe some of us are, but a lot of us aren't. I certainly wasn't. I think the church needs to understand that if they're going to stand at the starting line and say all lives matter, they got to be able to look back at everyone, the people of color that are back there and who are not to go back. Jesus said, I left the 99 to 1 and say, Black lives matter. I'm going to bring them forward. Indigenous lives matter. I'm going to bring them forward. Emotional there. But the last thing I will say is, as we're concluding this aspect is, Jesus talked about, in the, I think it's Luke 16 or 15, his response to the Pharisees because they were saying, he was hanging out with the dirty, rotten sinners. And of course, the Pharisees were like, oh, he hangs out with these decrepit people. So he told 3 parables as a response to that criticism. And it was the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. The church, I think it's important for them just to sit down in their boardrooms, in their offices, with their whiteboards, with all their plans, meetings, and say, okay, are we valuing the lost? Are we valuing the lost coin? Are we valuing the people who are out there, who are broken, who are lost? And does that include, in this case, Black people, Indigenous people? And that's a conversation for the leadership of the church, both here in Canada, and I would say also in the United States and in the world. And I think when those conversations happen with the right people in the right way, then God's going to do great things. Charity is doing great things.
Awesome, Aaron. Thank you so much. I so respect you and love you, and so have appreciated pivotal conversations. I know we were talking earlier this week about one you don't even remember, but really helped me years ago really better understand the race relations and the tensions between the Indigenous peoples of Canada and the white colonists, and how that all works together to create the world that we live in now, and how complex and broken and dysfunctional that is, and other conversations that have been ongoing in my life. You've been a voice and a catalyst for change in this one man who hopefully with humility will be able to be a catalyst for change within my community and my influence and culture. And I think as these conversations go on, and we will be having more of them, if you are watching today and join me here in Vancouver sometime in July, we're going to bring Abigail, a Black voice, an Indigenous voice, and me maybe just facilitating some conversations so that all of us collectively can bring these perspectives together, help move the church, move culture, be a catalyst for true and lasting change. I don't know how we get there, except that we keep talking. We give space for voices to be heard, and we allow humility to grow in our hearts for the spaces that we need God to transform them. So thank you for being my friend, and thanks for being here today as part of our living room session.
Todd, thank you so much for your kind words. Love you too. And thanks for allowing me to be a part of your personal journey and the journey of your church.
It's a pleasure and an honor. I look forward to more conversations, friend. And we'll see you later.
Okay, ciao.
Thanks for joining us today, friends. Thanks for being our guest. I hope that you have been impacted and challenged. Feel free to share a comment. Feel free to share this content. I think it's important, it's timely, it's voices that in some ways are not being heard right now in this movement and in this Canadian cultural context. I believe they're so important for us to really move forward together. I love you. God bless you. Goodbye.